On at 7 a.m.
Bonsoir, good evening. Mon nom est Marvin Rotran, je suis le directeur national de la Ligue des droits de la personne de B'nai B'rith Canada. Cette réunion est bilingue. Les gens vont parler dans la langue de leur choix. On ne donne pas de traduction. I'll explain how the call will work in French first, and then I'll come back to English. Je vais donner une brève introduction, puis je vais demander à Hank Topaz, le directeur régional du Québec de B'nai B'rith Canada, parler pour 4 minutes concernant les services que B'nai B'rith donne. Puis, on va aller à le consul général d'Israël, M. Paul Hirschon. Merci, M. Hirschon, pour être ici ce soir avec nous autres. Après ça, on va aller aux 4 membres de l'Assemblée nationale qui va parler aux personnes rassemblées ce soir. En ordre, Madame Prass, puis Madame Garceau, Madame Setlaki et finalement Madame McGrath. Après ça, on va avoir une période des questions écrites. On a demandé des groupes communautaires des autres d'envoyer des questions. Nous avons les reçus il y a quelques jours et je vais les lire dans l'ordre qui sont reçus. Puis après ça, on va avoir une période des questions orales. Les gens vont lever les mains et je vais le prendre au tour de rôle. Cet appel est sur Zoom, mais également sur YouTube. Les gens sur YouTube n'ont pas la capacité d'utiliser la fonction chat ni de poser des questions pendant la période des questions. On va essayer de terminer vers 20h30. So let me just briefly explain in English. This call is bilingual, but there's no translation service. You can speak in the language you're most comfortable to speak in. We will begin with a brief introduction, that's mine, followed by a speech by Hank Topaz, our Quebec regional manager, speak for about 4 minutes about the services B'nai B'rith gives in the Quebec region. He'll be followed by the Israeli Consul General, Paul Hirschon, who graciously made himself available this evening. He'll speak about 4 minutes. And he'll be followed by the town hall format of the 4 members of the National Assembly who agreed to interface with our audience. This call is centered on the center west and the west island of Montreal, where most of the B'nai B'rith members and supporters on the island and in Quebec live. And I welcome all our friends from all ethnic communities who are here with us this evening. In order, it will be Elizabeth Prass, followed by Bridget Garceau, followed by Michelle Setlaki, and finally Desiree McGrath. After the M&As have spoken, there's a period of written questions. We ask community groups and others to send us questions. We received 10, and we'll read them in the order that we received them. They're going to be going to different M&As per the questions that came in, after which we'll have a brief oral question period. We'll ask the audience, if you have a question, you put up your hand, and I'll recognize you as I see the hands going up, sort of first come, first served. Tonight's call is on Zoom, and it's on YouTube. The people on YouTube will be unable to use the chat function or take part in the question period, but you can contact us after the call if something came up that you would like to more information on. No one could have foreseen when we first planned this call about the terrible events that would happen in Israel, that 1,400 people would be brutally murdered in a terrorist attack. Thousands of rockets fired at civilian targets and hundreds of hostages taken. The state of Israel is very dear to the Jewish community in Canada, and you can understand the concern that is there. We did not cancel this call. People said, let's go on with it, but let's invite the Consul General to say a few words, and I'm glad he's here. He'll give us the information that we need. I want to reassure the audience that B'nai B'rith is active in logging anti-Semitic incidents that occur during this stressful time, and as well ensuring that incidents that need to be in our audit are recorded and stockpiled so that they can be properly transcribed into the audit for 2023. So we're going to get on with our evening. J'appelle Hank Topaz, le directeur régional du Québec de B'nai B'rith Canada, de nous donner un aperçu des services que B'nai B'rith donne à la population. Merci, Hank.
Bonsoir tout le monde. J'espère qu'on peut m'écouter.
on respecte du fait que nous avons 4 conférencières dans l'Assemblée nationale d'une gendre féminine. Je les présente avec des roses facultatifs et j'espère que vous allez accepter notre cadeau des roses. D'abord, j'aimerais aussi reconnaître que sur le Zoom, je vois la présence de notre éminence grise, Mr. Lawrence Bergman. And I believe we have to acknowledge his presence. He is a great member of our community and has served this community admirably for many, many years. And we only wish him well. I also want to note our great thanks as a community for the public statement of the government of Quebec in favor of Israel's right of self-defense, and even more importantly, in condemnation of the hatred that has been demonstrated in some of the manifestations en bas de la ville. In counter to that, and I hope I'm not taking anything away from the fact that we have with us the Honorable Paul Hirschhorn, the Consul General of the State of Israel, that we will, as a Jewish community, be holding a vigil and a support rally for those hostages held in captivity, which will take place this Sunday, 12 noon at Place Victoria. 12 noon, Place Victoria. And as the different communities supported us, notably the Filipino community, the Iranian community, and other communities supported us this year during the March on Israel's Independence Day. We are hoping that the same levels of support will be present on that day in support of the release of our hostages. Now, to go on to the points that my dear colleague Marvin asked me to speak about, we basically operate in 3 areas here in Quebec. One is, of course, the area of advocacy, which you are all aware of, and part of this evening is part of that advocacy function that we do. We also provide services, including meals to the poor, which are delivered by our volunteers and our staff. And finally, we are trying to get off the ground something that's been going on hell's bells in Toronto, and that's sports, which used to be something here, part of B'nai B'rith in Quebec. We used to have bowling leagues and the like. And on December 3rd, we will be doing our first pickleball tournament. So we hope that you'll look for the information on that and continue to support B'nai B'rith and the work that we do on behalf of the community. Je vous remercie à toutes et à tous pour avoir participé ce soir et je retourne la parole à Marvin.
Merci, Hank. Avant que je donne ça au consul général Hirschhorn, j'aimerais noter la présence des élus sur l'appel de ce soir. Je commence avec les 4 membres de l'Assemblée nationale, Elizabeth Prass, Bridget Garceau, Michel Setlaki, et Desiree McGraw, representing about 75% of the Jewish population in the Montreal region. I welcome all 4 of you. J'aimerais aussi noter la présence de Sonny Morose, le conseiller municipal de Snowden, Madame Stephanie Valenzuela, le conseiller municipal de la district de Darlington, Mr. Steve Erdelier, le conseiller municipal de la ville de Côte-Saint-Luc, confirmé, mais va arriver un peu plus tard ce soir, Mr. Jack Ederi et Mr. Leon Elfazi, les élus de la ville de Hampstead, Mr. Joe Ortona, le président de English Montreal School Board, qui va nous joindre incessamment, Madame Ellie Israel, commissaire de la English Montreal School Board, qui va nous joindre un peu plus tard. I also want to note presidents of associations and other, Mr. Norman Simon, the president of Canadians for Coexistence, will be joining us soon, Mr. Carl Wilson, the president of the Cornucopia Association, Madame Cynthia Waith of Barbados House. I want to give a big shout out to the Filipino Heritage Month Society. They have an event tonight, and they're collectively on the Zoom call, watching us at the moment before they go back into their event. Thank you all for coming. Mr. Mark Henry, the president of the Jamaica Association of Montreal, and Madame Sharon Nelson the first vice president of the Jamaica Association of Montreal. I also want to note the presence of Don Warrenholtz, the president of the Townshippers Association. You can't keep a good man down. We are beginning to build an alliance with the townshippers on all sorts of issues in which our organization and theirs have common views. And even though we're focusing on the island of Montreal, Mr. Warrenholtz wanted to be here with us this evening. I welcome you, Don. Also, I'd like to announce that Mary Grace Ocampo Goldenberg, the president of the Filipino Nurses Association of Quebec, will be with us a bit later this evening. Thank you, Lawrence Bergman, for being here. You're a well-known name in our community. Thank you, Maria Corsi, parent commissioner of the English Montreal School Board, for being here, and Mr. Norberto Mandin, lead journalist for the Canadian Pinoy Radio Montreal. I will come back to others who I may have skipped in a little while. Mais maintenant, j'appelle le Consul Général d'Israël, Monsieur Paul Hirschhorn, à nous adresser. Paul, could you take about 4 minutes to address the audience? You're on mute, Paul.
Merci, Marvin. Thank you, Marvin. Merci. Bonsoir. Je suis désolé que pour moi, c'est un peu difficile de parler en français, spécialement parce que je parle avec un accent sénégalais. Je ne suis pas sûr que vous pouvez me comprendre, mais je dois dire maintenant, at the beginning, que les positions, les réponses du gouvernement de Québec étaient superbes. Immédiatement, le massacre en Israël, j'étais en Israël pour recevoir le ministre des Relations internationales, Martin Biron, qui était en route d'Israël pour ouvrir le bureau de Québec en Israël. That visit, unfortunately, was postponed. And I just have to say that the minister made it crystal clear to me that the visit was not cancelled, the visit was postponed. And it will happen, and the opening of the Quebec office in Israel will happen in the near future. I admit to being a diplomat. I've seldom been accused of being diplomatic. So I apologize if I don't recognize all the people I should recognize. I do just want to take the opportunity to say a hello to my friend Elizabeth Price, le membre de l'Assemblée nationale, and I know that there are also a number of others here, and I want to take an opportunity to say thank you for the support from all of you for Israel. Very briefly, I'll just say this. I was in Israel when the massacre happened. I woke up at 6:30 in the morning with the first siren in Tel Aviv and went on with the rest of Israel to learn about a barbaric massacre, the depths of depravity of which we have never experienced before. I think many of you have, I know, I'm sure all of you have been following what's going on, and I don't need to go into too many of the details. I'll just say this. It's true that we've cried and we've shed many, many, many tears. But anybody who thinks that our tears are an illustration of weakness is making a mistake. 2023 is not 1943. They are going to regret what they chose to do. We did not want to be, and we do not want to be in a state of war, but we are. And we will pursue this to the point that we dismantle Hamas and they no longer rule the Gaza Strip. Beyond that, I want to say a few words about Quebec, about Montreal. I met with the chief of police yesterday. He brought the subject up, not me, of ideas of people in the Jewish community and the fear that maybe is manifesting, and some stories he's heard about one or two people who've maybe thought of or wanted to take down a mezuzah or remove kippot. He was absolutely incensed and he was absolutely clear that this is totally unacceptable and that he and the Montreal police force, the SPVM, will guarantee that people can live their lives in safety and in security, and he was absolutely crystal clear about that. I will say that they have been working very, very closely with my security detail, with the consulate security. I seen it already in the 10 days since I got back from Israel. It's quite something to see the close cooperation and work that they've facilitated for us and how they are working. So within the darkness that descended upon us, there is still some light there. We have this week on Thursday the funeral here in Montreal of Alexandre Luc, not an Israeli citizen, a Canadian, a tourist to Israel, brutally murdered at a music festival, actually escaping from the music festival. And his funeral will be taking place this week. It's something that has touched us across the world, not just in Israel, but right here in the heart of Montreal and the Jewish community of Montreal. I spent an hour and a half with the parents last week. It's a devastating experience for them to have to grieve for 2.5 weeks before the funeral and the Shiva even begins. The body lands back in Montreal today. So it's a difficult time. And the only thing I can say that makes it a little bit easier for my own experience over here in Montreal is that we have received a warm embrace, an incredible embrace, in particular from the Jewish community, but way beyond the Jewish community across and throughout Quebec. I will just say on an added note is that it's been quite enlightening to see that the French language media in Quebec adopted Israel's version of the explosion at the Al-Ali hospital before the government of Quebec and before any of the English language media in Quebec adopted Israel's version. So the support has not only been from elected officials, it's been grassroots out there in Quebec, and that is truly appreciated. I'm going to leave it at that. I very much hope that everybody will go to the rally on Sunday. It's important, it's needed, it has a tangible impact on the securing the release of our hostages and on the security of the Jewish community here in Montreal. So thank you, everybody. I unfortunately am not going to be able to stay for the entire conversation. I will do as much as I can, but I've got a number of calls coming in at the same time. So excuse me if I do at some point go off the video. And merci beaucoup pour l'invitation pour être ici avec vous aujourd'hui, ce soir. And just a last quick shout out to B'nai Brit. I think you do some terrific work here. So thank you and keep it up.
Thank you very much, Consul General. Your words are heartening at a time when people need to hear those words. Very meaningful, and your presence is much appreciated today. Before I go to Elizabeth Prass, I want to recognize a few other dignitaries who I didn't see before, including Dita Burku, City Councilor of City of Côte Saint-Luc, Mr. Bashir Hussein, the President of the Council of South Asian Communities, Mr. Brian Bloomer of the Knights of Pythias, Madame Yvonne Sam for the Guyana Cultural Association. I'm now going to go to Elizabeth, and Hank had mentioned a motion that had been adopted by the National Assembly. That motion was quite unequivocal, condemning terrorism. And it was much appreciated by the people who knew about it, but not many people seem to have known about it. It did not get the publicity that perhaps it merited. I was told that you gave a very strong speech in the National Assembly, and perhaps you can lead off your presentation tonight by telling us a little bit about that motion. Madame Prass?
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Elizabeth.
Always a good start. All right, sorry about that. I just wanted to start by thanking Neighbors for giving me and my colleagues the opportunity to better get to know the community tonight and to let them better know us. And I'd also like to thank Consul Hirschon and Lawrence Bergman for being here. To people, I think that especially in this time, a lot of people in the Jewish community are looking up to. So I'll start with what Marvin said and what was alluded to. So last week in the National Assembly, we passed a resolution condemning the heinous acts that occurred in Israel. And if I may, I'm going to give you part of the speech that I gave on behalf of the Quebec Liberal Party. So last week, as a proud member of the Jewish community, I was honored to deliver a motion in the Quebec National Assembly to condemn these heinous acts perpetrated by Hamas in Israel and to reaffirm Quebec's commitment to the Jewish community of Montreal and of Quebec. Resistance cannot be confounded with terrorism. Wars are meant to be fought between soldiers, not perpetrated against innocent civilians targeted simply for the fact that they were Jewish. October 7th was a day marked by human depravity and barbarity, and it also marked the greatest tragedy in terms of Jewish lives lost since the Holocaust, violence on a scale unprecedented in Israel's history. On this day, hundreds of innocent Israeli victims, children, seniors, Holocaust survivors, and entire families were torn from their homes, taken hostage or murdered, sometimes in front of their own family members, simply because they were Jewish. The barbarity that took place that day is forever engraved in our memories through the horrific images and information that we were given, because we would never have imagined that such inhuman acts would take place in our world. Already 6 Canadians have been confirmed dead, including that of a young Quebecer, Alexander Look, a resident of my own riding, who was brutally killed along with more than 260 young Israelis while attending a music festival celebrating peace. Our deepest condolences to his family and friends. Over the last few days, I've been in touch with many members of the Côte Saint-Luc and Hampstead communities whose children were in Israel studying while seeing the horrors being committed on TV and desperately trying to reach their children. For days, they had to go through the unimaginable pain and worry of getting and staying in touch with them and arranging for them to get safely home. Like many of you, I spent days frantically trying to get in touch with family to confirm that they were safe. And like many of you, my family members are serving in the IDF, and many others have been called in as reservists. And I am constantly thinking of them and praying for their safety. Like you, to struggle to hear and watch what is happening in Israel, yet I can't look away. The other night, I gathered with women at the Montreal Tourist Center, and we came together to comfort each other and to perform mitzvahs for our community and to support the Israeli people. It warmed my heart to be among women that share the same pain and hope that I do. Let us remember that Hamas is not synonymous with the Palestinian people. And let's have no doubt that Hamas is recognized as a terrorist organization whose ultimate goal is the destruction of Israel and the Israeli people. War is meant to be fought between soldiers, not by massacring innocent civilians or kidnapping children. What is also unacceptable is the support for Hamas in Quebec, in Montreal, through shameful demonstrations that condone the actions of a terrorist group responsible for a devastating conflict and the tragic loss of hundreds of innocent lives. There is never an appropriate time to rejoice in the pain and suffering of civilians. The state of Israel has the right to defend itself in accordance with international law. Anti-Semitism is never acceptable, and I condemn its current resurgence and ask that we all rise as a province against such sentiments. The glorification of death has no place in this world, and it has no place here. We must stand up and be strong against those who attempt to intimidate and scare us. As with all of you, I pray that all the hostages will be spared and released without conditions. We must be strong for them, and our spirits will hold theirs up. So that is basically the Quebec Liberal Party, my response to the motion that was presented last week in the Quebec National Assembly that we were happy to vote in favor of. And now to tell you a little bit more about me for those who may not know me. So my name is Elizabeth Prass. I am the MNA for Darcy McGee. I am the child of Latvian and Moroccan immigrants and grew up in Côte Saint-Luc. I first entered politics as a policy advisor in 2006 and spent the next few years in Quebec City as a researcher and advisor for the status of women and various ministers for the Cabinet of Economic Development, Innovation, and Export Trade. I'm the mother of 2 young boys, one of whom is on the autism spectrum and attends the wonderful Yale Day School in writing. As an advocate for my son, the passion for politics, and wanting to contribute to society, I was inspired to run for office. Almost a little over a year ago, I was honored to have the voters' trust and be elected as the first female MNA for Darcy McGee and the first Jewish woman to be sworn into the National Assembly. I represent the ridings of Côte-Saint-Luc, Hampstead, Côte-des-Neiges, and Snowden, and I feel honored to do such because there's so much diversity in the riding, and to me, diversity is one of the things that makes Montreal and Quebec such a wonderful and successful place. For me, no other party but the Quebec Liberal Party represents my values, those of individual rights, of appreciation of our immigration communities, who, like my parents, helped build Quebec into what it is today. The Quebec Liberal Party is the only party that voted against Bills 21, 40, and 96. I believe in a strong economy and protecting our most vulnerable, whether they be people living in poverty, seniors, or a disabled population. I believe in equality for all, including for our English universities that should not be penalized for their success. It's small-minded policies like this one of the CACs that hurt all of Quebec, that limit our presence on the international stage, that limit the international researchers that we can attract, and that give businesses pause before they decide to invest in Quebec. I'm honored to be the official opposition critic for mental health, people with disabilities or on the autism spectrum, and for the fight against homelessness. These subjects are ones that affect all of us, and I'm truly passionate in my defense of these groups. So as I said, for a little over a year, I've been the MNA for Darcy McGee, and it's really, truly been a fulfilling experience working with individuals, working with different organizations, and working with partners in government to try and tangibly get things done for our different communities and for our society. So I'll leave the floor to my other colleagues, and I'll be happy to respond to your questions later on. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, MNA Press. Before we go to MNA Garceau, I'd like to recognize a couple other dignitaries on the call with us, and Mr. Dario Bocco, the Regional Commander for Eastern Canada of the Knights of Rizal, Ms. Minda Mazzoni, the President of the Federation of Filipino Canadian Associations of Quebec, Mr. Mark Roisberg, the President of the United Community of Russian-Speaking Jews, the Honorable Marlene Jennings, former MP for Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Privy Councillor, and somebody who's been very, very active in the Anglophone community in Montreal and Quebec. Just to let you know how old I am, Marlene and I collaborated together to create civilian oversight of law enforcement in Quebec in the early 1980s. So we go way, way back. Welcome, Marlene, for being on the call. Mr. Ramon Vicente, the President of Filipino Family Services, Ms. Julene Barrington, the President of the Antigua and Barbuda Association, Ms. Zenaida Karubi, the publisher of the Filipino Star and President of Gilmore College, and Mr. Jimmy Chan, President of several of the Chan associations in Montreal and very active in the Chinese community. Maintenant, je vais donner la parole à Bridget Garceau. Bridget représente la circonscription de Robert Baldwin. Et peut-être vous pouvez m'aider, Bridget. Je pense que c'est l'ensemble de la ville de Dollard-des-Ormeaux, où il y a une grande communauté de juifs, mais aussi ça inclut Pierrefonds, l'arrondissement de Pierrefonds-Roxborough. Bridget est bilingue, complètement bilingue. Elle est québécoise, mais je pense qu'elle a grandi en Nouvelle-Écosse. Donc, Bridget, many of our viewers today here on Zoom and on YouTube don't really know you. Your first term MNA. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing? And could you situate your riding for me? I'm a little less familiar with the West Island than I am the center west of the island of Montreal. Bridget Garceau, la parole est à votre. And Bridget, you're muted. We cannot hear you.
Okay, there we go.
There
I'm unmuted. Thank you so much, Marvin. I just want to, as Elizabeth said, thank you and thank B'nai B'rith for this this wonderful opportunity actually for us to introduce ourselves. Even though now it's been a year, we celebrated, all four of us. We're very happy about the fact that we've celebrated 1 year here at the National Assembly and as proud members of the National Assembly, but also of the Liberal Party of Quebec. And so what I will say in terms of my writing, I took over from Carlos Etao. I'm going to say probably one of our best finance ministers here in Quebec. And so I'm very fortunate to probably represent one of the most diverse, I'm going to say, writings in Quebec, which is Pierrefonds, Roxborough, and Dollard des Ormeaux, DDO. We have, as the mayor tells me very often when we attend events together, over 60 cultural communities in our writing. And so diversity is at the forefront of many of our activities and also various decisions that we take, obviously, because it's very important in terms of respecting fundamental rights and freedoms. And that's one of the reasons why I entered politics. After 30 years of being a practicing attorney in family law, I was a partner at Robinson Shepard Shapiro. Some of you may know the law firm, but practicing family law for all of that time, and also doing some international law in terms of divorces and hate convention cases. But I was also very involved on the grassroots level, as we say, in terms of politics, more with the federal Liberal Party. For many, many years, I was very involved with Westmount Ville-Marie at the time, with Lucien Rabillard. I was her writing president, and then afterwards with Marc Garneau, and then I went on to become the vice president of the National Liberal Party of Canada. That was back in 2009, and so an opportunity came up. Dominique Anglade at the time was the leader. We wanted to have some women with my profile to enter politics. And so I did, and I was very happy to do so in the writing of Robert Baldwin. I've been living in the West Island for over 30 years, and I've raised my two children, Cassie, who's 25, and Michael, who's 22, in the West Island. And it's just such a very tight-knit community. And I know there's some West Islanders. Jimmy Chan, you're there. There's some West Islanders on the call today. And so, and at the time when I did get the call, it's never an easy decision in terms of entering politics, for obvious reasons. I'm not going to get into them. I don't have enough time tonight, I don't think. But one of the things that for me as an advocate, as a lawyer, as a mother, I just couldn't, at a certain point in time when you keep seeing the CAQ adopting very divisive laws which violate our fundamental rights and freedoms, and particularly in terms of minorities, and particularly with respect to Bill 96. I couldn't remain silent anymore, and that was the time the opportunity was made to me, and that's why I entered politics at that time. And so for the first few months and until this day, just about, I am the official critic for the status of women, for the youth protection. I've been very involved lately. I did what we call an interpellation on Friday with Minister Carman. There's lots of, as we know, issues with youth protection, also with conjugal violence. And in the last couple of months, Michelle Setlocki, who was the critic for international relations and la francophonie, is now our leader adjoint. And as a result of that, I was given the opportunity to take over that dossier. And so as the official opposition critic for international relations in la francophonie, as you can imagine, I've been very vocal about the conflict in Israel, and my deepest condolences, and I want to say it publicly, and I've done so on social media, but to all of the families who have lost very dear family members and friends as a result of the conflict. And I'm not going to repeat what Elizabeth mentioned, because that was our motion, and we stand in solidarity with Israel and Israel's right to defend itself. But we all know that we have to all respect international human rights law in this very deeply rooted conflict, and civilian lives are being lost, and there's a humanitarian crisis right now, and we have to do whatever we can to try to resolve the conflict.
Thank you, Bridget. The motion is very comforting to the Jewish community. It tells us we don't stand alone, that there are others who say, no, there's no place for this type of terror in the world. And I'm honored to say that the example of the Quebec National Assembly has been emulated elsewhere. Ontario, for example, 2 days later adopted its own motion, equally strong, and 6 of the premiers have spoken out. Mayors from across Canada have spoken out. The real message out there is Canadians are standing with Israel, and it's deeply comforting at this difficult time. I want to stress for our audience, it's a nonpartisan meeting. It's true the Jewish population tends to live in the west and center-west of the island of Montreal. These are our members of the National Assembly, and we want to get to know them better. I can say that probably some of the remarks that are made have a deep resonance with our community. I think a lot of people in our community would say, yes, I share what Bridget just said about certain laws or what Elizabeth said, but technically this is a nonpartisan meeting. We're not here to express a political preference. We're giving a platform to our MNAs. And I welcome your remarks, Bridget. I hadn't heard you speak before. You speak very cogently. Before I go to our next speaker, avant que je vois à Michel Setlaki, qui est notre troisième des 4 élus qui va parler aujourd'hui, j'aimerais qu'on ait des gens que j'ai manqué quelques fois avant. I'm going to announce the presence of Royland Sangir, the president of the Filipino Basketball League of Montreal, Mr. Andrew Cadell. Mr. Andrew Cadell est président du comité spécial sur la politique linguistique. Ms. Gemma Rayburn Burns, the president of Playmass Caribbean Cultural Organization, and Ms. Irene Anthony, the vice president of the Antigua and Barbuda Association. And thank you, Ms. Anthony, for getting your son, who is really well known in the National Basketball Association, for coming to help make the B'nai B'rith golf tournament that was held out in the West Island this summer a great, great success. J'irai maintenant à notre troisième invité, Madame Michelle Setlaki, qui représente le quartier de Montréal-Outremont. Ce quartier est relativement nouveau avant la refonte de la carte électorale. Outremont est une circonscription à part. C'était jumelé et une grande portion des élus de Montréal a été versée à Darcy McGee. Je sais parce que le conseil municipal de Montréal a opposé à ces changements qui, à notre avis, à l'époque, a réduit le poids politique de l'ouest de l'île de Montréal. Mais les cours a statué autrement, que la commission électorale avait des grands pouvoirs et bon, on vit avec. Michel, vous étiez élu pour la première fois aux dernières élections, mais avant, vous étiez conseillère municipale à la ville de Montréal. Leur perte, c'est le gain de toutes les Québécoises. J'entends que vous êtes très active à l'Assemblée nationale. I'm now going to give the floor to Michel Setlaki, the member of the National Assembly for Mount Royal, Outremont. Michel.
Oh, do you hear me? I believe so. Thank you so much, Marvin. Bonsoir à vous tous. Good evening to all of you. Thank you so much, Marvin, for organizing this call and allowing my colleagues and I to introduce ourselves and present the work that we do at the National Assembly. Before I give you a little explanation, give you some background information as to who I am and what I've done in the past, j'aimerais d'entrée de jeu mentionner que j'adhère entièrement aux propos de mes collègues Elisabeth et Brigitte. à l'égard des terribles actes terroristes visant Israël. J'ai été extrêmement choquée, peinée, et franchement, j'ai vécu un sentiment de it was unbearable to see what was going on and what is still going on. Et toutes mes pensées de solidarité et de soutien accompagnent la communauté. Et j'étais très, très fière de la motion qui a été présentée, et pour laquelle Elisabeth a livré une allocution très, très émouvante. So going back to myself, so I'm a lawyer by training, practiced corporate law for 10 years at Ogilvy-Renault, a large firm that is now called Norton Rose. I am a mother of three. I have three teenagers, two daughters aged 20 and 18, and a son aged 16. I am, as you mentioned, a former municipal councillor in the town of Montreal. So that experience at the municipal level was really what sparked my passion for politics. I got very much involved, and it was supposed to be a part-time position in the town of Montreal. I ended up doing it full-time. I actually ran for mayor of TMR, and that didn't work out, but I was extremely proud of my campaign and the team that I put together. And sometimes in life, things happen for a reason. And a year later, I ran in Dominique Anglade's team, and I just completed my first year as the proud Liberal MNA of Montréal-Outremont. La circonscription de Montréal-Outremont, elle est très diversifiée. Elle touche, comme vous avez mentionné, Marvin, je partage tout le secteur Côte-des-Neiges avec ma collègue Elisabeth Prass. Donc, on a essentiellement, vous connaissez très bien le secteur Côte-des-Neiges, très riche par cette diversité. On a essentiellement, je dirais presque toutes les nationalités présentes à quelques minutes d'où je vis, moi, à Ville-Mont-Royal depuis les 20 dernières années. Et c'est ce qui fait la beauté et la richesse de toute la ville de Montréal. Mais évidemment, je vais parler de ma circonscription qui est très, très riche par sa diversité. Et I fully share everything that Elizabeth and Bridget have said in terms, and I don't want to repeat it, but it's extremely important for me to highlight the value of this diversity and the values of inclusion that my colleagues and I share are very dear to my heart. So what Liz has said in particular about Bills 96, 21, 40, I totally agree with everything she said. Et en fait, quand j'ai annoncé ma candidature en mai de 2022, le projet de loi 96 n'avait pas encore été voté et je suis sortie de façon très claire pour dénoncer ce projet de loi-là et également à l'égard de la loi 21. Et plus récemment, la décision ou la proposition que la CAQ a mise de l'avant d'augmenter les frais de scolarité au niveau des universités, ce qui va toucher les Canadiens à l'extérieur de la province de Québec et les étudiants étrangers, et qui touche de façon vraiment qui aura un effet extrêmement négatif sur nos universités anglophones. Et pensons en particulier à Bishops dont la survie est en jeu ici, et je ne vais pas du tout négliger l'impact sur Concordia, pas du tout, et sur McGill, notre étoile qui rayonne à l'international et pour laquelle j'ai un sentiment de fierté immense. Donc, cette proposition de la CAQ, nous l'avons dénoncée, notre chef a récemment signé un op-ed, donc c'est un dossier qui me tient à cœur. J'espère vraiment que le gouvernement va reculer sur ce dossier-là. Pour vous mentionner les dossiers pour lesquels je joue un rôle actif à l'Assemblée nationale, évidemment, en plus de toujours défendre les intérêts de mes concitoyens de Montréal-Outremont. Je suis leader adjointe de l'opposition officielle depuis quelques semaines et je suis la porte-parole en matière de culture et communication, cybersécurité et numérique et accès à l'information. Donc, ça va me faire plaisir plus tard. It will be a pleasure for me to answer any questions coming my way. Thanks again, Marvin.
Thank you, Michelle. You know what strikes me about all you guys, you're all so fluently bilingual. It's hard to recognize that Bridget and yourself are Francophones, and Elizabeth's French is really good she's an Anglophone.
May I, Marvin? Actually, I forgot to mention something. If you allow me to interrupt, it's going to be extremely brief, but I wanted to mention that I grew up in Thetford Mines. I moved to Montreal when I was 19 years old to attend law school at Université de Montréal. But my mother tongue is French, but my dad is mostly Anglophone, and he did all his studies in English. So my parents had the great idea of sending me to an English elementary school, and then I did the rest of my schooling in French, and that turned out to be an excellent decision on their part. And I also wanted to mention before I finish, I'm sorry about that, I am of Armenian and French Canadian descent.
Okay, well, that's very, very interesting, because current laws would probably not have permitted your parents to do that. If now you had to enter school, you probably wouldn't have eligibility. And, being a grandfather myself, a grandchild who speaks 2 languages fluently at the age of 3, the other one being Bahasa, by the way, not French, because she doesn't live in Canada. But the idea of bilingualism as an asset is really important. And, encouraging people to be able to be competitive on the job market, having that extra asset is something I think we need to encourage more in Quebec. Thank you for your words, Michelle. Not all of our participants know you. And as you said, you recently celebrated 1 year as the MNA for Mount Royal, Outremont, which includes town of Mount Royal and what is the borough of the entire borough of Outremont, and I believe a part of Côte-Neige. Would that be right?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm going to go to our 4th MNA, and that's Desiree McGrath from Notre-Dame-de-Grâce. Desiree was someone who's well known and active in the community for many, many years before she decided to run. And like Elizabeth, like Brigitte, like Michelle, she was elected the first time to the National Assembly in the last election. So she too just celebrated 1 year. There's something wonderful about the democratic system. It has renewal. Somehow, somebody always seems to step up to the plate. And, clearly we have 4 young, vibrant, talented women who have been elected. We may not agree with them on everything. There may be things we do agree with them on, but clearly they have something to say. And we're hearing it tonight that they speak with passion and vigor. Desiree, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about yourself. I did have the pleasure of meeting you about 2 weeks ago at a special event to honor Dan Phillip, not for his lifetime of work for civil rights and racial equality, but for his work to combat anti-Semitism, which had never been recognized before until B'nai B'rith gave him a certificate of honor for having stood up as one of the most prominent Black leaders in Quebec to say fighting anti-Semitism is everybody's business. So Desiree, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marvin. And I think we've actually met before at a special dedication for the park in honor of Warren Allman, who remains to this day a tremendous role model for me because he was my member of parliament growing up, followed by the great Marlene Jennings, who remains a dear friend and mentor to this day. But I also stand on the shoulders of other giants, both Kathleen Weil and Russell Copeman, all of whom have represented NDG and Montreal West. So my riding encompasses all of NDG and all of Montreal West. And it's a great privilege, but also a lot of fun working with these 3 other women. It's been a highlight, actually, of this experience so far. And I am very grateful to them for their friendship and their example as well. So it's an honor to be with all of you this evening. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet you, albeit virtually, some of you whom, of course, I know in person. And I just want to say, again, I also stand very firmly behind the statements of both Elizabeth and Brigitte in solidarity with Israel, but also the Jewish people. And I want to express my gratitude to the Jewish community. Your contribution to Montreal and Quebec is extraordinary. And I think all minorities, all of Quebec, but in particular minorities in Quebec, owe you a debt of gratitude for your strong sense of justice and human rights. And I think that the linguistic minority in particular would be nowhere today without the strength of the Jewish community. So I wanted to just acknowledge that, but also acknowledge the angst, the grief, the anxiety that many of you, I imagine, are feeling beyond what we are observing, but those of you who have family and friends who are directly impacted by the events unfolding in Israel and in the region. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. My own entry into politics, I've actually not been involved in provincial politics. I had not been involved actually in provincial politics until Dominique Anglade approached me to run an NDG. And I did reflect on it and ultimately came around to agree for a few reasons. One, she had offered me, she wanted me to take a leadership role on the climate change file, which she understood to be an environmental file, but very much an economic file. I'm a trained economist and my background is economics and international relations. But also because of what I had seen unfolding with Bill 96, Bill 40, Bill 21, I had been living in British Columbia with my family for a few years. So I'm born and raised in NDG in Montreal West. This is my community. This is the community that my husband and I were raised in, that we're raising our own family in. But we went out to BC for several years, where I headed an international college with students from every province and territory, as well as selected from 160 countries. The motto was making education a force to bring together nations, cultures, and languages to promote a more peaceful and sustainable world. And so coming from that reality in BC, where my husband and I had been very involved in the Francophone community because our kids continued their education in French, and coming back to Quebec at the beginning of COVID, it was jarring to see how when the pandemic was being mishandled here, but perceived to be well handled, but certainly mishandled in comparison to British Columbia, and just some real concerns around what I saw as a more divided society. And again, not to be too partisan, but I had deep concern about the leadership of the Prime Minister and the Premier Ministre as paternalistic and divisive, and seeking to, as I say, having failed to divide Quebec from Canada in the past, to seek to divide Quebec within itself, and of great concern to me. So the combination of climate change, the opportunity to help shape those issues within the party and in the assembly, but also the opportunity to step up on, to be a strong voice for my community, which I consider to be, yes, Montreal West and NDG, but more broadly as well. And I actually waited until I saw the op-ed indicating that the party would in fact vote against Bill 96 to make sure that I was in a comfortable enough position to run under the Liberal banner. So new to the Quebec Liberal Party, but not new to politics. I had worked for Paul Martin as a senior policy advisor on international cooperation. I had been very involved federally at the federal level in the Liberal Party, along with Brigitte. And then, as I say, went to BC. Before that, I headed the Jean Sauvé Foundation, affiliated with McGill. You'll hear my views later on the university situation, because I came to Quebec. My family came to Quebec. My parents, I'm of Irish and American heritage, and my parents came to Quebec from the US for the universities, specifically for the English universities. So I certainly wouldn't be here today if some of these anticipated laws were in place. So my background is in education and philanthropy, and this was an opportunity to serve my community in a whole new way. And it really is a great privilege. The affluence, the relative affluence of our community masks the 25% of residents who live below the poverty line. And so, working with community organizations on issues that are, related to the cost of living and housing and all of the issues that we care about has been a great privilege. And I think we're lucky in NDG to have such strong community leaders. And I feel like an important part of my role is just to catalyze, convene, and really shine a light on the incredible leaders in our community. So I think those are the main points. So my files are climate change, environment, wildlife, and parks. I have now newly adopted the Eastern Township. So I heard that the townshippers were on the line. I look forward to visiting soon. And of course, we all work together on a range of issues that affect all of our communities and all of our dossiers. So I think I'll leave it at that and look forward to the discussion. Merci beaucoup, Marvin. Puis je vais juste aussi souligner un peu comme Michel, que mes parents sont d'origine américaine, donc c'était juste l'anglais à la maison. Ils ont choisi de nous envoyer à l'école en français, préscolaire, primaire, secondaire, et moi-même, j'ai choisi de continuer mes études au cégep à Brébeuf en français. And then later, when I switched to English in university, a bit the opposite of Michelle, I thought, wow, this is easy. So I'm very grateful for my French education. I'm a strong supporter of English institutions, but I am grateful that my parents chose to send us to French school, because I don't think I would be in this position today, the privilege of serving my community this way.
Desiree, thank you. I'm also an immigrant here. I came to go to McGill. And contrary to what you're hearing from the CAC, the position that we come and we leave, we're here.
Hank is, for those who don't know, is an American. He comes from New Jersey and he chose Quebec, and his French is very, very good. And his contribution to Quebec needs to be noted and recognized as well. Immigrants enrich Quebec. Desiree, thank you for your words. What I really appreciate about what all four of you said is we're getting to know you as human beings. Yeah, we see you on the news and as politicians, but that doesn't tell the real story of why you got into politics, the passion you feel for serving your fellow citizens and how you're doing it and what you're saying and why you're saying it. We learn a lot from this more informal setting that one of these Zoom calls allows. Desiree, thank you again for your words for the Jewish community. Jewish community is very present in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, and Chabad operates in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce as well. I found an email you and I exchanged in the year 2005. I guess we didn't have one until much more recently, but we obviously worked together on something back in 2005. You mentioned Warren Ullman. Warren sat next to me at City Council. I know that's going to sound strange. He was Solicitor General of Canada, longtime member of Parliament for NDG, held certain cabinet posts. He's synonymous with consumer protection in this country, redefining how we look at First Nations in Canada and how we interface. And of course, most noted for having abolished the death penalty in Canada while he was the minister. Warren needed to be honored, and it was my privilege to move a motion at City Council asking that the city give an appropriate honor to Warren. He only served one term as a city councilor, 2005 to 2009, because someone tore him away from his hockey games. He loved to play hockey, even in his 70s. Mayor Tremblay convinced him he had something still to offer. He chose to run municipally. Park's been named after him in NDG, and I'm proud to have played a small role in that by bringing it up originally at City Council. So now we're going to go to our written question period. There are 10 questions. I'm going to read them individually and send them to the person who there was. Try to keep your answers about no more than about 2 minutes or so we can get them all done and maybe have a few minutes left over for some oral questions. I see that somebody had their hand up. Desiree, you had your hand up, but it's a bit premature. So we'll go to question number 1, which is for Elizabeth Praz. Reads as follows. Bill 101 allowed an exemption that aided Jewish institutions hire rabbis and religious teachers from outside Canada, in that candidates so hired could send their children to an English language Jewish school. The exemption was for a 3-year period and was renewable. Bill 96 has reduced that to a one-time only 2-year exemption, making Quebec less attractive to such potential candidates. The Jewish community relies on qualified rabbis and teachers from the United States and elsewhere to serve its religious needs. No justification has been given for the rule change, which has definitely impacted institutions like ours in attracting top-notch talent. Clearly, the hiring of several rabbis and religious teachers each year does not harm the French language. My question is, can we count on the Quebec Liberal Party to advocate for a minor modification to Bill 96 to address this issue? Mordechai Nilkin, Executive Director, Rabbinical College of Canada. Elizabeth.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. And as I said earlier, I'll just remind everyone that we voted against Bill 96. And it was exactly for elements like this. During the article by article study of the bill, the Quebec Liberal Party at the time did propose an amendment so that the 3-year terms would be renewable as they are now. The purpose of that policy in the first place was to be able to attract foreign workers that we don't necessarily have in the fields that we're looking for here, and to facilitate their moving here under Bill 101 and thus allowing their kids to have eligibility to go to English language school. Once again, Bill 96 and elements like this hurt all of Quebec by not allowing rabbis, teachers, different professionals that Quebec needs to be able to advance and go forward. We're hurting all of Quebec society. We're hurting all of Montreal society, and it's doing nothing to protect the French language. So Bill 96, which was really just a divisive bill that played on false reality of French, of English and French communities in Montreal not being able to live together when we were living very well, we were cohabitating in our reality. So Bill 96 and measures like this are bad for all of Quebec. As I said, we did propose a motion. We continue to defend the inequities in Bill 96, and this would be something that we will continue to defend as well, because agreed that we need foreign professionals in different sectors, whether it be rabbis, teachers, nurses, professors, researchers, etc., to know that they can come here with their children and not be inhibited by the fact that their children will be forced to go to French school when they've never spoken French before, or will only have 3 years of exemption. So we're totally in agreement that this should not be put in place. It's dogmatic legislation, and we will defend the wrongs such as these any opportunity we can.
Thank you for that. I've just gone through the question. Each one of them could sustain a pretty long debate, but we're not going to get into that tonight. We're going to get the answers that are given, and perhaps we'll have another session that's more narrowly focused on some of the interesting information that comes out. The second question is for Bridget Garceau, and there's some similarities with the first question, and I'll read it, Bridget. It says, few of us can learn another language in 6 months, but that's what Bill 96 demands of immigrants to Quebec by cutting off their access to English services at that point. There are nearly 1 million Filipinos in Canada, and we contribute very positively to the economic success of the country. We are seeing a hesitancy of Filipinos to come to Quebec since this rule has come into effect. Almost every Filipino speaks English as a second and in some cases a first language. This draconian rule is practically an invitation for those wanting to come to this country to immigrate to Ontario or Western Canada. I suspect other ethnic groups who wish to come to Canada are reacting in the same way to this unreasonable rule in Bill 96. Can the Quebec Liberal Party seek changes to Bill 96 that are more welcoming to immigrants, providing a longer lead-in time to acquire French language proficiency? And the question is from Luzviminda Mazzoni, the president of the Federation of Filipino Canadian Associations at Quebec, who is a West Islander as well, although the association is in Quebec.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And I mean, as we all know, in terms of Bill 96, and not that I'm going to be partisan here, Marvin, but
you're allowed to be partisan.
I'm going to have to be partisan a little bit on this one because we did vote against it, and it is law. And so it's very difficult for us to come in at this point to say, okay, we can go and amend. But we all know that many of these provisions that were adopted violate and infringe on fundamental rights, and particularly the rights of minorities, Anglophones and allophones. And this is one of them in terms of the 6 month, to become proficient in French it's ludicrous. We all know that. It's highly prejudicial. And there are so many cultural communities that I met through the campaign in the last year. And it's it's something that's very difficult for them to understand, because the reaction to these types of provisions is, I'm not welcomed here. And that's very, very difficult, as an M&A with a very large, diverse community to hear those types of things. And so what I'm trying to do, because there are many provisions, certainly some of them that just came into force, that are also highly prejudicial, infringe upon rights and freedoms. And so I think our role as the opposition, all of us are bringing to the government, are highlighting all of these different aspects of the prejudices related to Bill 96, including the 6 month language rule, and how it affects everybody's daily life. And in terms of not getting information in English, in particular access to healthcare. And those are really fundamental and important issues. And so we're just going to keep hammering the government on the injustices. And hopefully at a certain point in time, because of the fact that we're advancing everybody's concerns, and they all are very legitimate, and we have to do something. And so hopefully at a certain point in time, there will be changes to the rules.
Thank you. What you said reflects what a lot of people actually called us about, said, I'm going to be on the call. This is what I want to ask about. And, B'nai B'rith enjoys excellent relations with diverse communities in Quebec. We support them, they support us, and many of them are immigrant communities, more recent new Canadians living here in Quebec, and this is an issue that's very important to them. La troisième question est pour Michel Setlaki et lit comme suit. René Lévesque, que j'ai interviewé plusieurs fois, aimait souvent dire que l'appétit vient en mangeant. Ça veut dire que plus on possède quelque chose, plus le désir de possession peut augmenter. Alors, la tendance du Parti libéral du Québec d'attirer des nationalistes et de parler de notre belle province comme une nation, ne pensez-vous que ça peut faire plus légitime et populaire les aspirations des extrêmes nationalistes et indépendantistes, et de nuire votre réputation comme ardent défenseur du fédéralisme canadien? La question vient de Andrew Cadell, qui est le porte-parole comité spécial sur la politique linguistique, un groupe pan-québécoise. Michel, c'est à vous.
Oui, bien écoutez, merci beaucoup pour la question. Entendons-nous qu'on pourrait passer beaucoup de temps à échanger sur cette question-là, mais je vais y répondre de façon brève, de la façon suivante. Je pense qu'on peut être les deux. I think we can be both. On peut être des fiers Québécois, fiers de notre nation, fiers de la spécificité québécoise, fiers du fait français, et souhaiter exprimer cette fierté-là de façon inclusive. Et là, ça m'amène à parler de la façon dont, de la façon dont la CAQ fait la promotion du nationalisme. Puis on s'entend que le terme nationalisme peut heurter certaines personnes, et même moi, c'est un terme avec lequel, qui nécessite une explication. Et voilà, je pense que le nationalisme qui crée de la division de la CAQ Ça, c'est leur nationalisme à eux. Ils n'ont pas l'exclusivité de la fierté québécoise et du nationalisme. Et en fait, quand moi, j'ai présenté ma candidature, encore une fois, en mai de 2022, le premier ministre a pris la peine de faire un tweet, c'était Twitter à l'époque, pour dire, tiens, une candidate antinationaliste pour le Parti libéral du Québec. Et ça m'avait choquée parce que je m'étais dit, lui, il n'a pas l'exclusivité de ce que c'est être une fière québécoise, une fière nationaliste, et il est en train de définir qui je suis, qui est mon parti, et ça m'avait vraiment heurté. Je n'avais pas répondu directement sur Twitter, mais ce que je dirais, encore une fois, c'est que le Parti libéral souhaite mettre de l'avant un nationalisme inclusif. Et là, je vais me référer au document que le comité de relance a présenté dans les dernières semaines, comité de relance présidé par notre collègue, notre chère brillante collègue Madouane Cadet, accompagnée d'André Pratt. This report puts forward an notion of nationalism that wants to be inclusive. And that is something that will need to be discussed by the future chef and by but what it says basically, and I agree with that, it's in the face of challenges confronting Quebec, Quebecers must unite around a common project. J'aime beaucoup l'idée de quelque chose qui rassemble, d'un projet commun, parce qu'on a des défis communs sur lesquels on doit tous travailler. Peu importe que les Québécois soient nouvellement arrivés, qu'ils soient nés ici, qu'ils soient de souche ou pas. Moi, ce que j'entends dans ma circonscription, quand les concitoyens avec qui j'échange, il y a un sentiment de fierté qui nous unit, et ce que les Québécois, mes concitoyens n'aiment pas, c'est se faire sentir comme des Québécois de second rang quand ils ne sont pas d'accord avec la notion du nationalisme que met de l'avant le gouvernement actuel, le premier ministre actuel. Donc, juste encore une fois pour résumer, it's an inclusive and unifying nationalism. That is what the Quebec Liberal Party must promote. Once again, I will end with this phrase that I find catch-all. We can be both. Who said that we can't be proud Quebecers, proud bilingual Quebecers, proud of our beautiful French language, wanting to promote it, all the while being Canadians. I have one country, and it's Canada. I don't need another country. I'm very much bothered by what I'm hearing from the Parti Québécois, and I hope that we will never have another referendum. I hope Canada will always be strong, and I firmly believe that Quebec is better served in the Fédération within Canada. So I hope I answered the question. We could go on, but I'm going to have to stop it there.
Thank you, Michelle. We're not having back and forth debates. Obviously, every question, every answer could sustain a long debate. There's some really great questions tonight. The fourth one goes to Desiree McGraw and reads as follows. What is a process the Quebec Liberal Party has in place to choose its next leader? What input will there be from party members and supporters? And the question comes from Ellie Israel, School Commissioner of English Montreal School Board, who happens to live in NDG, but represents Snowden Côte-de-Neige.
Great. Thank you so much. I have my answer is actually relatively short. There's one thing I'd like to add, just because I'm looking at the chat, and Michelle probably didn't have a chance to do that as she was answering. There was one question about nation and country. We hosted today a delegation from Massachusetts of legislators, senators, and state representatives, and they were asking exactly about this. And the way I explained it was, one can be a nation, and a nation need not form a nation state. So those of us who've worked in international relations, there's a distinction between being a nation and a nation state, which is generally a country. And of course, those of us who are liberal do not believe that the nation of Quebec need to form a nation state or a country. In fact, we believe deeply and passionately in Canada and being part of the Canadian Federation. And we believe that Quebec could be a strong, arguably the strongest contributor within that, having just returned from Alberta the other night. So I support what Michelle has said, and I think I do understand, because this premier has so poisoned the term nationalism, that it is equated with being narrow, negative, and exclusive. We understand we have a heavy burden of proof. The burden of proof is.
Thank you for the clarification. But let's go to Ellie's question, if you don't mind.
Perfect. So we've got a steep burden of proof. Very quickly on the leadership race. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, we were all at the Conseil Général in Drummondville, and the party laid out two things. One, a renewal report, a report to renew the party, quite a hefty document, because in the last couple of elections, the feeling was Quebecers said to the Liberal Party, go away and do your homework. So this is the start of it, some very serious homework, and Michelle has spoken to some of the key elements of that report. It lays out a strong, compelling vision, or at least a basis on which to have conversations. And to re-engage Quebecers and to regain the confidence of all Quebecers. The other piece, of course, was the rules around the leadership race. And so just very concretely, the race will begin in the fall of 2014. The idea is that the new leader will be in place
2024. You said 24.
Spring of 25. Yeah. So the leadership, even though informally it could start right away, and we've been tasked, we were encouraged by the interim leader to go out and find candidates. Formally, the race will begin in the fall of 2024, with the new leader being chosen in spring of 2025. And of course, they're going to need to collect signatures, I think something like 720 from at least 12 different ridings. So they'll need to sign up members, they'll need to fundraise. There's a $40,000 entry fee. And obviously it's vital that the members and the supporters are a critical piece. This is an opportunity to renew the party. So on the question of what will the input from party members and supporters be, it'll be essential, because it's the members and the supporters who will decide on who the new leader will be. So I am partisan. I will make no apologies for that. So feel free to become a member and have a say in who the next leader of the party is. But I think, look, the reality is we've heard, from media and others, and even some of our own supporters, to say, let's do this more quickly. Let's get a new leader in. Understandably, there are pros and cons to having a leadership race earlier versus later. There's no perfect solution, or as I say, there are no quick fixes here. I think all four of us who are on this call as MNAs, we all signed up for this job, or at least the prospect of having this job, very clear-eyed. I think we understood the glory days of the Liberals were not upon us. I don't think any of us were expecting to be forming government or in cabinet. So I think we're pretty clear-eyed about the task that lay ahead. And it's not necessarily sexy. It's going to be a lot of hard work for some time to come. And having been through a renewal process with the federal Liberals, I have confidence that we will get there, because, to quote Jean Charest, Quebec needs a strong Liberal Party. We have a duty to rebuild and regain the confidence of Quebecers. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time. And as I say, it's not all going to be sexy work. It's going to be hard work, but I think worthwhile as we rebuild. Having a new leader is essential. It's necessary, but it is far from sufficient. There's a lot of work we have to do to modernize our structures, to renew the party, to simplify some of the cumbersome weight of the past, and be a lighter, more agile, more flexible and innovative organization. So,
thank you.
Voilà.
Thank you, Desiree. The document you referred to, is that the report written by former Senator Pratt? And is it available on your website? Anyone can consult?
Yes, it is available publicly. I believe, yes, it is on our website, I believe bilingually. And yes, it is former Senator Pratt, along with Madwa Nika-Cadet, who is a fellow MNA, and they were the co-authors or the co-leaders, but there were a dozen other people, including Pierre Arcan, Antoine Dion-Charest, a number of people, Jeff Kelly, involved in that process.
Great. I'll invite everybody on the call or on Zoom who wants to know more about this, consult the document. We can continue this conversation on this point and on Andrew Cadell's question after we take better knowledge of that particular document. May answer a lot of questions. So the next question is for Elizabeth Prass. We thank B'nai B'rith for organizing this evening's town hall. The situation in Israel is of great concern to the Jewish community in Quebec. Our hearts go out to the families of the 1,500 Israelis brutally murdered by the Hamas terrorists. We hope for the safe release of the hostages. Our question deals with anti-Semitism in Quebec. We appreciate that Quebec will open a trade bureau in Tel Aviv. That's good for Israel and good for Quebec. We appreciate that the National Assembly passed the motion condemning the terrorists and standing with Israel. But as the B'nai B'rith annual audit shows, the number of anti-Semitic incidents in our province remains high. In fact, there were 722 such incidents in 2022. 6 provinces, including Ontario, have adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism as a means to better recognize and react to hate aimed at Jews. Quebec has yet to do so, even though most members of the National Assembly say they support the definition. Can you move a motion to adopt the definition so that Quebec will be the 7th province to formally adopt it? Mark Roisberg from the United Community of Russian-Speaking Jews. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Marvin. Well, as you noted, unfortunately, and especially with what's happened, events recently in Israel, instances of anti-Semitism are on the rise. And as we said during our speech at the National Assembly, we condemned those who came out in the streets to praise Hamas and celebrate the lives of innocent people that were taken. I believe that one of the ways that would maybe be the appropriate vehicle, if you will, to try and get the government to adopt, because as you said, Marvin, the Quebec government does have a minister responsible for the fight against racism, Christopher Skeet, who I believe has said that, well, his government has mentioned it, therefore they assume that they've done their work and have adopted it, if you will. So what I would suggest is I would be happy to sponsor a petition at the National Assembly on behalf of B'nai B'rith, asking that the government adopt the IRA definition. When we deposit a petition at the National Assembly, the minister responsible for the file has to respond within 45 days. And that sometimes in the past has been the opportunity where it's kickstarted a file and it's kickstarted discussions, and we've been able to see tangible results in the end. So I propose to sponsor a petition, and we can have a discussion later on how to best work that out. But I would be happy to bring that to the National Assembly.
Thank you. I think you have a deal. I will call your office tomorrow to get the ball rolling on that. I just want to say we have interfaced with the former minister and now with Minister Skeet, but we have had little progress, although we had a great deal of sympathy. So finding a way to get through the obstacles and get this done would be obviously of great interest to the entire Jewish community. And I thank Mr. Groisberg for raising this issue this evening. Next question to Bridget Garceau. Many individuals who emigrate to Quebec find that despite having the qualifications needed for their profession or trade, that finding employment is difficult. Those barriers are often caused by the rules put in place by the government of Quebec, which does not recognize certification of individuals who have graduated in their home countries as doctors, nurses, teachers, engineers, plumbers, mechanics, etc. The process to have one's papers recognized is bureaucratic and arduous, and many are told to simply go back to school here and pre-qualify, even though that may take years. Moreover, the French language proficiency requirements often demand a level of knowledge comprehension far beyond what a particular job really requires. The result is often you find qualified persons from regions such as the Caribbean, Asia, or Africa toiling at low-level jobs for low wages rather than work in the field for which they are eminently qualified. What can be done to have Quebec review the issue so that there is speedier and more realistic qualification regime in place to accommodate those individuals and fill the needs of the labor market? Cynthia Waite, President, Barbados House.
Oh, thank you very much, Cynthia, for that question. And it's such an important question as a result of the fact that we are going through such difficult financial times in terms of the cost of living, housing. We have also a serious shortage of, I'm going to say manpower, but of workers, as we all know, that the CAC denied for a number of years. And as a result, our essential services aren't being rendered to the population, whether it's in health, whether it's in youth protection, whether we know we were missing 8,000 teachers just before school started this past year. We don't have enough educators, we don't have enough daycare workers, we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough nurses. And you would think that the first thing that we were going to do because of such a shortage is to look to immigration and to facilitate the process of certification, to accelerate it, because one, we need everyone, we need the workforce, and two, everybody deserves to live in this province with dignity and to have a certain, I'm going to say, standard of living. And employment is key to that. And so I can tell you that currently, one of the parliamentary commissions is looking at the immigration bill. There is a new immigration bill that's being reviewed. Part of it is going to be, there are provisions that they're reviewing with respect to accelerating that process. Monsef Daraji, who's our M&A Nelligan, is our spokesperson in terms of immigration. And I have no doubt that he's looking at that issue very carefully because of our diversity out in the West Island. It's one of the key issues, I have to say. And so I'm really looking forward to the outcome in terms of that bill, because as a result, I'm hoping that that issue is going to be rectified and there's going to be better access and acceleration for those that want to work in Quebec and that have the credentials. They have, you know, they're professionals and they should be allowed to work. And now let's just make it happen.
Thank you, Bridget. I'm sure your words are comfort for a lot of people from immigrant communities in Quebec. It's an issue that's brought to us often. It's outside our mandate, but we hear about it quite often. La question numéro 7, c'est pour Michel Sedlaki. Je sais, comme député, vous avez 3 rôles significatifs. Légiférer comme législatrice, représenter les intérêts de votre circonscription, vos électeurs et électrices, et appuyer votre parti dans l'Assemblée. Pour vous, quelle est la priorité, votre priorité? Bryant Chang, vice-président, Association chinoise de Montréal. Michel?
That is such an excellent question. C'est une excellente question. Honnêtement, le rôle d'un député est extrêmement prenant et gratifiant et ça nous occupe pratiquement 24/7. Mais si on me demande quelle est la priorité, pour moi, la priorité d'un élu, et je l'ai bien compris quand j'étais impliquée au niveau municipal, c'est d'être à l'écoute. Si on n'est pas capable d'être à l'écoute, on n'est pas à la bonne place. Il faut être à l'écoute de nos concitoyens. Et on doit porter la voix de nos concitoyens. Donc ça, je me le rappelle toujours. Dans tous les gestes que je pose, je me dis, est-ce que ce que je dis, c'est pertinent? Mais c'est pertinent si ça vient du terrain. Et pour répondre plus spécifiquement à la question, honnêtement, on n'a pas assez d'heures dans une journée pour tous les chapeaux qu'on porte. So I hope I was clear. I mean, as an elected official, our most important role is to listen, to prendre le pouls de ce que les électeurs ont comme préoccupation, and it's to bring it forward at the National Assembly. So obviously, it's very important to take the time in our writings to be out there, to be present in different events, to meet different groups, to be in touch with what's going on locally. If we don't do that, there's we're not fulfilling our most important role. Now, once we're here in Quebec City, we spend a lot of time in the National Assembly, and our role is to work on bills that are put forward in this context by the government. And So all the hours that we spend in commission doing an article by article review of bills that are tabled is a very important exercise. It cannot be, ça peut pas être négligé. We actually are there to make sure that these bills are, well, either we oppose part of it or we make sure that ils sont bonifiés, because no bill is perfect. And every time we make a comment, we have to ask ourselves, is it in the best interest of all Quebecers? Are we forgetting something? Are we forgetting someone? We must not, that's our role as Liberal MNAs. We don't want to leave anybody behind.
Thank you.
And then lastly, obviously, I'm sorry, Marvin?
Thank you, Michelle. We were going to end at 8:30. Given it's 8:29, we have 3 written questions left. I'm going to ask for a little brevity. I'm going to try to get all 3 questions in. We'll take 10 minutes more. If anyone has to leave, I understand, but hopefully our guests will stay with us for the extra 10 minutes. Question number 8 for Desiree McGraw. We are appalled at the recent announcement by the government of Quebec to raise tuition for out-of-province students at English language universities to nearly $18,000 a year, far higher than the norm in any other province for international students or those from other provinces. The way this was described by Ministers Roberge and Derry make the policy seem purely discriminatory, aimed at putting the continued existence of universities such as McGill, Concordia, and Bishops in peril. No argument was made as to how this promotes French. A huge economic benefit for Montreal is that we are a university city and a hub for a knowledge-based economy. This attack on our academic standing will simply drive jobs investment away from Quebec. What is the position of the Quebec Liberal Party? Will you raise this in the National Assembly? Ramon Vicente, President, Filipino Family Services. Desiree?
Thank you. I appreciate the question and I will be brief. So you started the question by saying we are appalled. We are appalled. We do not support this initiative, this measure that we hope will be rolled back. And for a more detailed overview of our position, I would encourage you to read the op-ed in this past Saturday's Gazette by Marc Tanguay, by our interim leader. And he concludes it by saying this needs to, inviting the premier and inviting the government to just withdraw this policy. It is bad public policy that is not rooted in evidence. And one of the questions that we have already asked in the National Assembly is, show us the proof. If the rationale is to keep that students from other countries and other provinces are responsible for the decline of French in Quebec, where's the evidence? So this is not evidence-based policy. It is bad for our economy. The Chamber of Commerce, Montreal International have come out against it. The mayor of Montreal has come out against it. And it's bad for our reputation. We are promoted alongside Boston, just talking about this today, again, with the delegation from Massachusetts. We are viewed and we are promoted as the best city for post-secondary education in North America alongside Boston. So this is a real blow to our reputation, to our economy, to our competitiveness and the global competition for talent. And then there's the reciprocity issue, because Quebec students are going to other provinces. Those students, our students, are also subsidized by other provinces, and there's relative parity there. It's not to say that there aren't legitimate things that we need to look at in funding the university system, and perhaps in particular, the Francophone universities. That is a legitimate issue, but this is not the way to solve it. Again, it's the CAC approach of zero sum, of so-called promoting French, but not actually promoting French, and simply discriminating against entire classes of citizens or institutions. So we wholeheartedly reject it. We have already stood up in the National Assembly, and we will continue to do so. And as I mentioned, for me, this is personal. My parents came here from the US because of the English universities. I ran a college, an international college, and a foundation affiliated with McGill of students from around the world. This is an asset. This is not a threat. And we as Liberals, who take an inclusive approach to these issues, rassembleur, as Michelle said, this fundamentally goes against our value system, and we will continue to strongly oppose it as we.
Thank you, Desiree. My co-host Hank has his hands up. I have 2 questions left, Hank. Do you need to speak now, or should I get the 2 questions in? You're on mute. We can't hear you.
we're getting a bit late, so that's why,
Yeah, we're going to be
before we close, I do want to get those questions, that question in.
Excellent. Next question, question numéro 9 pour Michel Sedlaki. Votre parti, est-ce qu'il pour ou contre le projet de loi 15? Pouvez-vous, s'il vous plaît, expliquer un peu ce que le projet de loi 15 est et quel impact il pourrait avoir sur notre établissement de santé locaux comme l'hôpital général juif? L'hôpital juif est souvent considéré comme un hôpital innovant et j'aimerais savoir comment cela pourrait être affecté. Before you answer, Michel, I'm going to read the other question, which is actually on the same topic, which is for Elizabeth Prass. We have heard little about Bill 15, the CAC's government overhaul of the healthcare system. There hasn't been very much coverage about it in the media, and I don't understand why. All I have heard is that Bill 15 will further centralize healthcare in Quebec, which isn't a positive thing, according to the people I know who work in healthcare. And that's from Norman Simon, President, Canadians for Coexistence. So la première partie pour Michel, the second part for Elizabeth.
OK, certainement. Quelle excellente question, encore une fois. Thank you for the excellent question. And to answer it directly, the official opposition, the Liberal Party, voted against the principle. So when we're studying a bill, there are different stages, and the initial stage was to vote for or against the principle. And we voted against because we saw so many issues with the bill. On a vu énormément de zones d'ombre. On a vu peu de bénéfices. On a vu durant les consultations, moi j'ai assisté à toutes les consultations particulières, de nombreux groupes sont venus dire, et on le voit nous aussi, on le constate, que c'est un exercice de centralisation. Et il y a beaucoup de groupes qui ne se retrouvent pas dans le projet de loi. C'est un projet de loi qui a été déposé de façon prématurée. On en a la preuve, le gouvernement a déjà déposé des centaines d'amendements après de nombreuses semaines d'études détaillées. Et je dois dire, le ministre, il est ouvert, il est patient. On contribue parce que voulez-vous qu'on fasse à partir de maintenant? Le projet de loi a été déposé, on a voté contre, on a levé le drapeau par rapport à toute une panoplie d'enjeux, mais là, on est à l'étude détaillée et ce qu'on fait, c'est travailler de façon constructive. Oui, c'est un projet de loi qui va avoir un impact sur le terrain. On a bien peur, on a gagné certaines batailles, mais on a encore très peur qu'il s'éloigne des réalités du terrain, qu'il s'éloigne de ce qui est nécessaire au niveau local, qui va enlever la voix à des comités locaux. Et encore aujourd'hui, en fait, pas encore aujourd'hui, aujourd'hui, non seulement, évidemment, comme vous savez, dans les dernières semaines et les derniers mois, il y a beaucoup de groupes qui sont venus de l'avant avec leurs préoccupations. Aujourd'hui, ce sont des anciens premiers ministres qui ont signé une lettre adressée à Christian Dubé pour dénoncer sa réforme. Et je peux prendre en particulier un enjeu sur lequel il y a eu des amendements qui ont été déposés aujourd'hui, encore une fois, pour que les conseils d'administration retrouvent une partie de leur autonomie, parce que je vous rappelle que les conseils d'administration seront remplacés par des conseils d'établissement. Beaucoup de pouvoir entre les mains de Santé Québec. La question des fondations et des activités philanthropiques, il est très, très important que ça demeure entre les mains des fondations. On ne veut pas que des dons soient remis à Santé Québec pour être affectés à d'autres fins que celles pour lesquelles ils ont été octroyés. Et on est très préoccupé par l'autonomie des centres de recherche. Là, je pense que je vais arrêter ma réponse à ce stade-ci, mais on continue de travailler de façon constructive, on continue de critiquer et voilà, c'est un exercice qui va durer encore plusieurs semaines.
À première vue, toutes vos remarques sont très légitimes et nous de poser des interrogations sur le bien fondé de la loi. Je suis loin d'être un expert, mais les questions semblent être très pertinentes. Elizabeth, you want to add something for the last question?
Sure. So as Michelle said, she's been sitting on the committee with our colleague André Fortin. The reality is, unfortunately, the CAC has a majority. And this bill is going to become law, whether we vote for it or not, and most likely to vote against it. However, Our job and my colleagues' job while they sit on committee is to make sure that we try and propose amendments to get the best version of the bill that we can. I think we've been having a lot of discussions with the Jewish General Hospital and our CIUS, and one of the biggest concerns is the centralization. So as many of you know, the Jewish General Hospital is known for being innovative, putting together pilot projects that then are so successful that they're deployed all across Quebec. And I will give you one example of how the Jewish General would have been stunted if Bill 15 had been had been law before COVID. 2 weeks before COVID rules went out where everyone had to wear a mask in March of 2020, the Jewish General Hospital, 2 weeks before, based on their research and based on their information, started asking all of their patients and users and employees to wear masks. Under Bill 15, they would not have the flexibility to do that on the local level. Everything is going to be centralized. So hospitals that come up with programs and create services that cater to the realities of their population on the ground will no longer have the ability to innovate and to be flexible the way they are now, because everything is going to be centralized. And so it's the central agence santé that is going to be telling them what they can and cannot do. So one of the things that we're so proud of in our CIUS in the Jewish General Hospital is its innovation, and that's going to be curtailed by Bill 15. You're no longer going to have user committees. I have a child who's on the autism spectrum and speak on behalf of people with disabilities. Under Bill 15, institutions will have the option to keep their user committees or not. Those user committees are very often the voice of vulnerable people who can't always defend and speak up for themselves. And so it's essential in terms of advocacy for those vulnerable populations to have that voice. And most institutions are not going to choose to keep their user committees because they're there to criticize the way that that hospital or that health institution is being run. So we're very worried. As Michelle said, whether it comes to boards in the different CIUSes, the foundations and donors, we want to make sure that we have local support to bring these issues to the forefront so that the government does recognize that amendments and changes need to take place. And we are having conversations with our local institutions and with our citizens to see how we can best address all of those concerns.
Merci, thank you, Elizabeth. Au nom de B'nai B'rith, au nom de ma collègue Hank Topaz, j'aimerais remercier les députés Prass, Garceau, Setlaki et Gras pour être ici ce soir avec nous autres et pour avoir alimenté une conversation très, très intéressante pour répondre aux questions de nos participants. As well, thank you for your openness and warmth towards the Jewish community at this very difficult time. I'll repeat, there is a demonstration on Sunday at Place Victoria. Everyone is welcome to come to this important gathering. So the message gets out. The video for this evening will be warehoused on the B'nai B'rith site. For those who prefer to get it directly from me, please just send me an email. We'll send you the link to the video. Hank, do you have any final?
I absolutely do. First of all, on a débuté la soirée, la séance, avec la parole impassionnée d'Elizabeth Prass qu'elle a donnée originellement dans l'Assemblée nationale concernant les atrocités qui étaient commises par Hamas envers les citoyens de l'État d'Israël. My question is, and it's to all four of you and to all of your colleagues throughout the Assemblée nationale, we do not want to have a degradation of how the world looks at these atrocities, slowly substituting them by an erosion in the face of what has happened. So what is now starting to come through is the cry about humanitarian needs. It is not Israel that brought this upon, as you understand, and all of you understand. It's not Israel that brought this upon the people of Gaza. It is Hamas that brought this upon the people of Israel, and it brought this upon their own people. So we are hoping that you will hold strong and you will make sure that all resolutions hold strong in the face of what is going on so that Israel can not only save Gaza and its people, but allow Israel to do the job to remove the atrocious and atrocity committing Hamas from that part of the world. And we thank you.
Thank you once again. These are sentiments I think we all share on this call. I want to say again that the motion of the National Assembly is important. B'nai B'rith is doing what it can to disseminate it. It hasn't received enough publicity as far as the bulk of the population of Quebec is concerned. It comes as welcome news to so many when we inform them that this resolution was adopted. Merci, mesdames et messieurs. Thank you to our audience for being here. I repeat, on va entreposer le lien, la vidéo sur le site web de B'nai B'rith. Celles qui préfèrent avoir ça comme un courriel de moi, contactez-moi. On va envoyer le lien. Vous pouvez voir la réunion encore. Bonsoir, good night.